A chance encounter with a stranger in the parking lot of a post office led to years of terror for a Boise family. A Boise woman argued with a complete stranger after he parked in a handicapped parking space without a handicap placard. Little did she know, the man that she confronted was so furious about the incident that he began targeting the family for years. That man is 76-year-old Frank Abbott Sweeney.
Well, we had done a little research, and we had known that he'd been involved in the legal system prior. He'd had some issues back east. He'd been incarcerated at least 3 times in the federal system. He had been involved in some protection issues as well, and that he had actually hurt a police officer, shot a police officer with a machine gun back in the 60s.
Darren Salman, an investigator with the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, says within weeks of the incident, the family started getting postcards, all of them written on a typewriter. The messages on the cards included accusations that various members of the family were criminals, pedophiles, drug dealers, or infected with HIV. None of it true, and the victims had no idea who was doing this to them, and neither did investigators.
But Mr. Sweeney did a pretty good job of covering his tracks. He would utilize different drop-off points, different post offices. He would buy all his postage with cash, things of that nature. So at that point, it becomes an issue of when's he going to slip up, and when are we going to find something that we can hang our hat on and go forward with.
An alarming amount of personal information about the family was included in the cards. Sweeney also sent postcards to schools and neighbors of the victims, claiming to be from the sex offender registry and writing that the victim's husband sexually abused a child. Again, was not true.
His motivation was basically revenge and embarrassment of people that he felt had embarrassed him, and that he had used his means, which is basically a private investigator, to find personal information, criminal histories, and all that of people he should not have had access to at all. But that's just a weak link in the system. Somebody should not have provided that information to him.
All of this continued for years, with more than 40 postcards being sent.
Like any of us would feel, they felt victimized. They felt threatened, knowing whether this person is actually, surveilling their house, following them around, following their children around, giving specific details about their child's school schedule in a whole other state. That's very troubling. And as you can imagine, we all lock our doors at night and want to go to sleep. It'd be very hard to get some rest and to know that somebody's out there watching them, exploiting them, and then terrorizing them in that way. It's a way of mental terrorism, I believe.
3 years after Sweeney started stalking the Boise family, he started stalking a new family after a fight at a bank drive-through window. This time, though, he was caught on camera, and soon enough, investigators zeroed in on him. Several agencies raided his house, found evidence that he was in fact the culprit, but that wasn't all they found.
We found a couple portraits of Adolf Hitler, some writings from some renowned and known Nazi-type folks, but we also found some things in his house that were just a little odd. First, namely, 2 rattlesnakes. He had 2 live rattlesnakes.
Sweeney was sentenced earlier this month to more than 4 years in prison.
People might look and say, oh, and he got 51 months. Look at his history. Look at his past. Well, that was a way better sentence or a way better result than we would have gotten trying to prosecute this through the state or the county system. And it's not that our state and county counterparts are able to do that. It's just the sentencing guidelines are minimal compared to the federal. And so it behooved us to take it on a federal level and involve the inspection service to do that.
Investigators say the families are more than relieved now that Sweeney is behind bars.
The guy in the shadows is no longer out and able to do this anymore. We know we got the right guy, and now we can go home tonight and have a good night's rest knowing that he's behind bars.
Growing up in Idaho, Tim Gainley always loved being outdoors.
Skier and wakeboarder are my 2 things.
Depending on the season, you could find him flying down Bogus Basin or gliding across Lucky Peak.
I've been doing that since we got our first boat when I was probably 7, 8 years old.
Things started to change for Tim after a skiing crash during his freshman year of college.
Long story short, it was an awful experience, but that's where I started. I had sort of my first experience with prescription medications.
After breaking his collarbone in the crash, Tim was prescribed a basic opioid to help him deal with the pain.
It was The worst pain I've ever had in my life, absolutely.
That pain continued for months as his collarbone didn't quite heal and again broke. Gainley was prescribed even more opioids, but soon enough, that prescription ran out.
But my doctor stopped prescribing me it, and I kept finding it on my own because it was helping me, and I liked the way it made me feel, really. And I was really struggling in school. I was doing anything and everything to support my habit, and it was December 4th of 2012 I was arrested for my first time and charged with my first felony.
It is a big issue here, and we have several deaths that have been related directly to opioid overdoses, opioid misuse. Our numbers track very closely and even a little bit higher than the rest of the country.
Dr. Lee Binion is an emergency physician at St. Al's in Boise.
Medic 1-5, medical 1 minute.
Over the last decade, she has seen firsthand just how serious the opioid epidemic is. In the first 6 months of 2018 alone, she saw 130 deaths related to opioid overdoses.
Every day.
Every day?
Every day.
As pre-hospital providers.
For the last several years, Dr. Binion has been leading the way in Idaho to fight the opioid epidemic with a new approach. She explains that fight starts with undoing decades of bad prescription writing.
Physicians really never got taught about pain management, addiction management, and so they're relying very heavily on information that they're getting from pharmaceutical companies.
She believes that changing the conversation around opioid addiction could make a huge difference.
So let's look at this in a different way. Let's look at harm reduction. And let's look at everything that we can do in our community to reduce the harm that is related to the addictions while we try to treat the addiction.
But it was far too late before I knew I had a problem.
Tim Gainley's name may be familiar.
Have you Googled me?
He made headlines for stealing from the Boise State bookstore. After his arrest, Gainley got clean for a time, but soon relapsed and focused on finding a cheaper option to pills to fill his addiction.
When I went back to it, I went right into heroin. It was much more inexpensive, much more potent.
After years of running in and out of the legal system, Tim was eventually sentenced to a 3-year minimum sentence in Idaho.
There was nothing that was going to stop me from using. That's all I cared about at that point, you know.
So they say, well, you're addicted, you stole money, you're going to prison, and then they just sit there. I think the access to treatment is probably a bigger issue because no one has access to treatment.
While Tim's story serves as a major inspiration for change, for Dr. Binion, it's even more personal.
Well, I had a light bulb moment because I thought that my kids were never going to be able to pull anything off on me because I knew the ropes and they pulled it off on me.
Dr. Binion is Tim's mom.
She knew I had a problem before I did.
As a heroin addict, he has stolen from me, he's stolen from his friends, he's stolen from other family members, from jobs, from work, from the university, and he's in prison. Having him in prison is just devastating.
I hold a lot of guilt on myself for what I've caused her, what I've caused my family, what I've caused my friends.
And it's really interesting, all the research that's coming out.
Tim takes full responsibility for his actions, while his mother, Dr. Binion, is taking on the responsibility of educating physicians.
It has helped me in that I can share with them that story, and that makes me more believable to them.
Tim understands why his mom uses his story to help others. And when he's released from prison, he hopes to work together with his mom to help other families.
If I could say anything to anyone right now, it'd probably be the families. That the support and love that they give goes a lot farther than they may think.
Trying not to enable, yet be supportive is a very fine line. And it takes a lot of failures before you get it right, and then maybe even then you don't get it right.
I don't want people to go through what I have gone through.
Joe Parris, Idaho's News Channel 7.
This is Chewbacca. He is an amazing animal.
Although this young black bear has been sleeping in Charles Erickson's garage, it doesn't live here.
The animal is half crippled in its back leg. Its left rear leg is, I don't know if it's broke or deformed.
Charles explains that he spotted the bear while hunting in Garden Valley. He says that it appeared to be injured and abandoned.
I don't know of any human being that has a conscience, that would sit there and let it die instead of doing something to help it. So I just covered his head with my sweatshirt, and I picked him up and I put him in the back of my pickup, drove down.
Since then, the bear, most often called Chewy by the Erickson family, has spent most of his time here in the garage.
I've just been nursing him back to health until I could take it to that place.
But the bear also did other things.
And he climbed the telephone pole and he walked around the yard.
While Charles was explaining his story, Idaho Fish and Game officers were just outside his house waiting to take the bear into their custody. Charles tells me, though, he never wanted them involved.
These guys are going to make the call whether to euthanize it or not, where the other rehabilitation center says that they don't euthanize.
Well, this is Wrigley. She's a 14-week-old German wirehair pointer.
Evan O'Neill with Idaho Fish and Game says that while they do appreciate people wanting to care for animals, they need to stick to pets, like dogs.
There's no circumstance where you can legally pick up a wild animal, take it home for whatever reason.
He says if people see an injured animal in the wild, they need to leave it alone.
Give us a call and tell us where he found it, where the bear was located, so that maybe we could look into it, versus what ended up ultimately happening.
Back in his garage, Charles reluctantly prepares himself to give the bear back to Idaho Fish and Game.
I know, buddy. I know you don't like this.
Put the bear in the cage.
I want you guys to justify it. I'm going to put it in the cage. Don't sit there and tell me what to do right this moment. I'm asking you to justify why I can't take it to the refugee.
So you're going to sit there and torture this bear?
I am not torturing this bear, sir. You are.
Thank you.
Don't say thank you to me. You're going to kill this animal, and it's going to die, and its blood's going to be on your hands.